Welcome back. Now, I thought I would discuss today. Oh, you've got some bells over there, perhaps still. Cool. Um, One of the people I follow on YouTube, called AK, has just finished doing a series called Let's Read, where he was reading out this book called Fields of Wheat. And this is a book he'd read many years ago, and I think, from memory, and I'm sorry if I got this wrong, I think he said he read it in college. So I'm guessing it was probably somewhere between, say, 13 and 18 when he read it. So I don't know if we go somewhere in the middle. Let's guess he was 15 or 16 when he read it originally, and he's just finished reading it again. And it kind of gave me an idea, and I used AK as my litmus test. So what I mean by that is I asked him, I named three characters and said, have you ever heard of any of these before? Because they were all English ones, and I thought he quite possibly had not. And indeed, he said he'd never heard of any of them. So it makes me think that these three characters sort of never really made it to the US. Well, more than likely they didn't. So I thought I would discuss three of the series of books that I used to really enjoy when I was growing up. And I'm sure that, because all these ones are very old now, so I'm sure you'll be able to find them online if you did want to read them, if my video here inspires you and you decide you do want to read them. But I was probably a bit younger than that. In fact, I was definitely younger than that, because the books I'm going to discuss I probably read when I was 8, 9 and 10 years of age. So they are for a younger audience, but that doesn't take away from how good they are and how those are all really excellent reads. So I thought I'd discuss the three of them today. So the first one that I wanted to discuss today, sorry, bear with me half a second, I was just turning off the sound on my phone before I forgot, was Mr. Twiddle. So the Mr. Twiddle books, there's about 3 in the set, were written by Enid Blyton, who was a very well known English children's author. And Mr. Twiddle, he was an older gentleman. He was retired, and he was he was always befuddling about and doing silly things, and like he'd come home from town and it had been raining out, so he'd have his umbrella with him, he'd have his kippers for his dinner, and he'd have his newspaper, and he'd get all muddled up and put things in the wrong place. He'd put the kippers in the entrance way where his gumboots and his umbrella should go. He put the newspaper in the fridge ready for his dinner, and he'd put the his wet raincoat, an umbrella, in the lounge, getting all the carpet wet where he wanted his newspaper to be, and things like this. So he was always getting very mixed up and muddled like that. But as a child, I found that very amusing to read about this gentleman called Mr. Twiddle. And he had a cat, and I don't recall the cat's name, I'm sorry, and the cat hated him. And one day, he had to look after the cat. I think his wife had gone to visit her sister or something, so Mr. Twiddle had to look after the cat, and he wanted to go into town to get his newspaper, and the cat followed him into town, but then didn't sort of want to follow him home. So in order to get the cat to follow him home, he decided to buy a couple of kippers, and he slipped one inside each shoe. So of course the cat smelt the fish, and then followed him all the way home, which was of course a quite clever idea, although I can see lots of downsides to putting fish in your shoes as well, I must say. But the problem was all the other cats in the neighbourhood, all of them followed him home, and he got home and he'd forgotten he'd left his fish in his shoes, and all the cats were around the house trying to get inside the house, and he couldn't work out why. And then his wife came home, and she was asking why all the cats were hanging around the house, and he couldn't remember, and he was saying, oh, he really had no idea and things. And then his wife found the fish that were meant to be for their supper in his shoes, and you can just imagine how that goes down, sort of thing. So yeah, as a child I found those Mr. Twiddle stories very amusing, so I used to enjoy reading those. So that was the first one I was going to discuss. The second one I was going to discuss is Professor Branestawm. Now, Professor Branestawm, there's 13 or 14 books, and they were all written by Norman Hunter, if you're wanting to Google those. Now, Professor Branestawm was an inventor, and he's always inventing different things, and somehow his inventions always end up getting him in trouble or breaking or something. So, an example is he invented a home burglar system. It was basically a big robot type thing, but shortly after inventing said home burglar system, he lost his keys. So he got home and couldn't find his keys, so he decided to climb through the window, at which point this home burglar system robot of his ties him up and he puts a sack over his head and all this, so it ends up the only person the home burglar system ends up catching is himself. Now, one invention, because the Professor Branestawm books I think were written pre-World War One, so one of the inventions that he invented in the book that did actually come to real life, did really happen, was he invented a self-winding clock. So basically, in his case, it was a cuckoo clock that you didn't need to wind up each day. And the problem with that invention, though, is that he designed the cuckoo part of it slightly incorrectly. So at 1 o'clock it did one cuckoo, at 2 o'clock it did 2 cuckoos, and so on and so forth, like it's meant to. But it got to 12 o'clock and it did 12 cuckoos. Then it got to 1 o'clock again and it did 13 cuckoos. 2 o'clock came around and it did 14 cuckoos, and so on and so forth. And it got to the point where it hadn't finished cuckooing for 1 hour when it was time to start cuckooing for the next hour. So at this point the whole clock just gave up the ghost pretty much. So it destroyed itself because it was trying to cuckoo for too many hours all at once. So again, it was an amusing story. Now, I'm actually going to share my favourite of all my Professor Branestawm stories. So the Professor Branestawm books, every chapter was a separate story. So it was great for children because you could read one chapter before bed or something, and you got a whole story, and then the next night you could read the next chapter. Anyway, my favourite story of Professor Branestawm's is about him buying this library book. Now, I think the name of the library book was The Life and Times of a Lobster, or something like that. It was definitely something to do with lobsters. And what happened is, I just managed to knock the bales off the other side of my truck. Never mind, I can fix that. Actually, before I tell you the story, I'll just tell you this thing about baling here. Funny thing with me and baling, I go through a stage of wanting to manually do all my baling like this, manually put it all on the trucks and trailers, and then manually unload it again at the other end. Then I go through a stage of, oh no, that took too long, and I'll grab an auto load trailer, or one of those trailers with the arms that come out the side that pick up the bales, and do it that way for a while. Then I'll get sick of that and go, no, I want to manually stack. I enjoy manually stacking, so I want to do that. So I'll go back to manually stacking for a while. So now, since for the first time in my whole life I'm running more than one farm at once, I'm doing a mixture on different farms. So some of my farms I'm manually doing all the bales, and some of my farms I'm doing it using one of those trailers with the arms that come out the side and pick up the bales as you drive past it. So yeah, hopefully that's a good compromise. Anyway, so coming back to this Professor Branestawm story, and it's my favourite of all of the Professor Branestawm stories. So he borrowed this book from the library called The Life and Times of a Lobster, and as it turns out, he lost the book. So rather than facing fines for returning it late or something, he decided that he'd be very, very clever. He went to another library and he got out the same book, and then he went and returned that book to the first library. And then, of course, when the book was due back at the second library, he went and got it out from the first library and returned it to the second library. Now, that would have been fine and dandy, except that in the area where he lived, he lives in Upper Pegwell, which is a made-up place, of course, but in Upper Pegwell, well, in the Pegwells, there's Upper Pegwell, Lower Pegwell, all the different pegwells around and about. Don't remember the names of all of them, but in total there's 14 libraries in the area where he lives, which is probably quite unrealistic. In the area the size that he supposedly lived in will not have 14 libraries, but that would just ruin the story not to have them. So it got to the stage where he kept on getting out these library books and then he would lose them. So he'd have to go and get the same book from a different library to return it to the first library when it was due. And it got to the stage where he'd borrowed this book from 13 different libraries and lost it at home somewhere and couldn't find them. So he'd then gone to the 14th library to get out the book, and it got quite disastrous by this stage because he only had one library book which 14 libraries were wanting and it had to be returned to different libraries. So he was basically spending his whole day cycling to a library, getting out this library book, then cycling to the next library to return said library book, and then the next day having to repeat the process, going to get it from get the book out from the library that he got it from to return it to the next library, and so on and so forth. So all 14 libraries were having this book returned by him and then taken out again the next day to be taken to the next library. Now, obviously, this sort of thing can't go on forever, and obviously it didn't. And so what ended up happening is that all 14 librarians came to dinner at his house, and they all came on the same night. And throughout the course of the evening, they all found these library books that he'd lost somewhere in his house, and they were in all kinds of places where he'd put them down and forgotten about them. Because again, Professor Branestawm, I suppose, in some ways was a wee bit like Mr. Twiddle. He was quite forgetful. He'd always wear 5 pairs of glasses on his forehead. 1 pair was for reading, 1 pair was for writing, 1 pair was for outdoors, 1 pair was for looking over crossly at when he was stern with you, and then the 5th pair was for finding the other 4 pairs when you'd lost them. And normally, when he'd lost them, they were just on his head still and he'd forgotten they were there, generally speaking. But it probably shows, the kind of sense of humour that as a child I appreciated in things that, I would enjoy characters like that and stories like that. So that was the second author I wanted to talk to you about. So that book was Professor Branestawm, written by Norman Hunter. And the third one is Biggles. Now Biggles is probably more AK's cup of tea for sure, because it's probably similar in some ways to the Fields of Wheat book that he's just finished reading. So Biggles was a World War I pilot. The Biggles books, and there were a number of them, were written by W.E. Johns. And W.E. Johns, as I understand it, really was a pilot during World War I. So his books weren't just, although they were fiction and they were novels, they were based on reality. They were based on things that he'd really lived through and really seen and done. So they weren't just written pie in the sky. So yeah, Biggles was a World War I pilot, and one of the things that I understand is that all the stories in Biggles' books all actually happened in real life to World War I pilots. However, obviously in the Biggles books they all happened to this one pilot, and that certainly was not the case. This was, stories gleaned from lots of different pilots that flew during World War I. There's a few Biggles stories that really, really stick in my memory. So Biggles flew a Sockworth Camel. Now, my understanding is these World War I planes, they didn't fly particularly high and they didn't fly particularly fast or anything. But one of the stories, and as I said, all of these stories were based on true stories of things that had really honestly happened in World War I, with the only difference being that in the Biggles books they all happened to the same pilot, whereas in reality it didn't all happen to the same person. Anyway, it got to Christmas time, and the squadron, and he was part of Squadron 266. You see, I probably read that book when I was 9 years old. I still to this day remember what his squadron number is. Okay, so he was part of Squadron 266, Well, Squadron 266, who were on the front lines during World War One, decided they wanted a turkey for Christmas dinner, but the the what do you call the people that do all the cooking in the army or the Air Force, can't think of the word off the top of my head. Anyway, the chefs, as it were, but I know chefs isn't the right word, so didn't have a turkey. So they said, well, if you go and get us a turkey, we'll cook the turkey, we'll pluck it and cook it for you. So Biggles took off in a Sopwith camel, and he flew all around looking for a turkey. Couldn't find any on the British side of the front lines. Decided to have a look, just a very small look, over on the German side of the front lines, not too far in, and sure enough, there was a farm that with some turkeys on the yard, and he sort of flew around, and there weren't any German planes around. There didn't seem to be any German soldiers on the ground, so he decided to land to steal one of these turkeys. So, circled around a couple more times just to make sure there were no Germans about anywhere, and then he landed, grabbed this turkey, which he thought he'd strangled to death, and shoved it in the cockpit with him, because Sopwith Camel is a single seat plane, I think. No, it might be double seat. Yeah, I think it is actually a double seat plane. Anyway, he stuck this turkey in the cockpit with him, open cockpit of course, being World War One, and took off on this paddock again. Now, no sooner had he taken off than he saw, I can't remember if it was one or a couple of German planes who saw him and made a beeline for him. So he was trying to duck and weave to avoid being shot out of the skies by this German plane, while at the same time, trying to get away. Obviously this other plane had the advantage of height over him because he'd just taken off. And to make matters worse, the turkey, which he thought he'd strangled to death, obviously he'd actually just stunned, because this turkey very, very much came back alive and decided it didn't want to be in the cockpit of an aeroplane, so it crawled sort of down between the side of the plane and him to try and get out of the cockpit, out the back. So here he is, trying on the one hand to avoid being shot down by this German fighter plane, and on the other hand got this very much alive turkey in his cockpit, trying to get out of his cockpit. And the turkey ended up kind of getting up between the back of Biggles, the back of his seat sort of thing, or his back, and the seat, the back of the cockpit. So what Biggles did to stop this turkey from wriggling around so that he could actually fly and get away from this German plane, was he leaned back very, very hard against the turkey. And that seemed to work, because the turkey stopped wriggling about. And Biggles was able to finally get away from this German plane and fly back to the airport where his squadron was based and things. And upon landing, he discovered the reason this turkey had stopped wriggling about after he'd leaned back hard against it was what had actually happened is that the German in the plane had managed to get off a round on their gun, which actually hit the turkey and killed the turkey dead. Now, had the turkey not been there, it would have hit Biggles instead, and Biggles would more than likely be dead. So it was a fluke that the turkey was just in that right spot at just the right moment, that when the German tried to shoot Biggles in his plane, he actually ended up shooting the turkey dead instead. So yeah, that story sort of remains in my mind quite well. So and AK in particular, because I'm pretty sure after hearing Fields of Wheat, he would enjoy the Biggles books. So I'll just repeat, the name of the author, if you want to try them, is W.E. Johns. And as I said, I probably read those books when I was about 10 years old. So they're not really designed as an adult read. They're designed more as a, young person's read who's just coming into his teenage years type thing. But you might enjoy it still. So you might want to give it a go. So yeah, those were 3 authors and 3 series of books that I really, really enjoyed as a young'un. So just you can see why, as I'm doing this baling, why sometimes I really enjoy manually baling. I do enjoy stacking my bales and loading them onto a truck or a trailer and unloading them again at the other end. You can see how also it's very time consuming. So when you've got lots of bales, and I have got lots of bales on this farm, I need lots of bales, so I've got lots of cows on this farm, how it can, you can get sick of it after a while and decide, no, let's go and get an auto stacker trailer or something. Just make things easier. The one thing I definitely do when loading bales onto either a truck or a trailer is stop that. So, because I'm using a cordless steering wheel, if I've got it sitting sideways when I put it down to use the keyboard to walk, my character will try and move sideways. So I'm just going to straighten the steering wheel when that happens, which is what's happened there. Anyway, as you can see, whenever I'm loading a truck or trailer or unloading a truck or trailer, I do the straps one at a time. I don't just, I know you can press, I think it's L, to do up all your straps or undo all your straps all simultaneously when you're in the cab of the tractor pulling the trailer or the cab of the truck in this instance. But when you're wanting to manually load and unload like this, I always do the straps one at a time. So what I end up doing, that way you see I don't accidentally knock all my bales off my truck or trailer. So I'll demonstrate, so I'll keep this video going for long enough to go back to the paddock and start loading the truck again. But when I'm unloading it, you see I only unstrap one row of bales at a time, and then put them in the shed. And that way, worst case scenario, sorry for that, but yeah, worst case scenario, if I do make a mistake and knock all the bales, only 4 are going to fall over. The 2 that I'm trying to pick up and the 2 beside it. That's the most bales I can accidentally muck up and knock over all at once is 4, because I only unstrap them one at a time. And it's exactly the same when I'm loading the bales. I load 2 on, like where these 2 just were, up against the headboard of the truck. Then I load the 2 on the other side of the headboard of the truck. Then I jump out of my tractor and I strap those 4 bales down before I start loading the next 4 on the other, a bit further down on the deck of the truck. And that way, again, if I make a big blue and accidentally bump all the bales and knock them all over or something, I've only got 4 that I've got to pick up again, which isn't too big of an ask really. But yeah, it is. When I'm manually baling like this, I do turn my time down, and you can see I've got my time at the moment on 0.5, so it's running at half speed, and that's simply because it just takes so long to bale. Now, I'm not an expert baler. I've been doing it for years. I'm still not an expert at manually baling, even after years of practice. So yes, there might be a lot of people that can do it a lot faster than I can, but I find baling to be quite time consuming really. But yeah, I also find, I think it's kind of weird, but mowing grass and making and wrapping bales is probably actually one of my favourite jobs to do in the whole of Farming Simulator. I don't think I would enjoy the game much if there were A, no animals, and B, no bales. Like, let's say the only way to get bales to feed your animals was to buy them from the shop. You couldn't make them yourself. You couldn't mow lawns. Let's say all paddocks were crops, and so all you could do on a farm was crop farming. You couldn't do grass and you couldn't do animals. I don't think this game would have anywhere near the same appeal to me. In fact, I think I probably would have played the game for maybe a few weeks or something, or maybe a wee bit longer than that, because when I was playing FS13, I was doing crop farming then, and I didn't really do any grass at that stage, so I probably played that game for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months. So I think if this game had no grass fields you could mow and bale up, and no animals, so all it was crops, for me it probably would have been a 4 or 5 month game and then I would have taken it off my hard drive again, because I've got Steam and all my games on Steam. I can still take games off the hard drive for not playing them and then loading them back on again later if I want to play them again, and that's what I tend to do, because the fewer games I've got on my hard drive, of course, the faster the system runs. So yeah, I would have probably only played Farming Simulator for a few months, then taken it off the hard drive again, and probably never ever have gone back to it if all you could do was crops and there was no animals and there was no I had the tractor in the wrong gear then. I had those so nicely stacked, but never mind. So I think animals and grass work, baling and things, is my favourite thing to do on the whole of Farming Simulator. Okay. But you'll notice that when I pick up the two bales, I've got them off centre on the tractor. If I go in behind like this, you can see how it's off to one side. Well, there's a reason for that, and I'm going to show you in a second. It does make it slightly harder to drive the tractor, especially because wet grass bales, which is what these ones are at the moment, they will become silage, but the wet grass and silage bales actually weigh a lot more than the straw bales do, or the hay bales do. So it's quite difficult, but the reason I do it is so I can get them onto the truck or the trailer better. Like that, you can see how I can push it up against the headboard, and for the ones on the other side, I will pick them up using the other side of the tractor, the other prong, as the primary one. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute too. Actually, I'm going to get this bale that's over here first. Now, I should also point out that I'm well aware I shouldn't be using prongs to pick up wrapped bales, that you should be using the clamp type things instead. I find it very, very hard to stack bales onto a truck or trailer using those clamps. I also think, and maybe either PA Playboy or Fury Machine Gaming, who are both farmers in real life, could tell me if I'm completely wrong here. Although I've got to be honest, I'm not going to change my practice even if I am completely wrong. If you're just picking up, there's so many layers of plastic around these what will be silage bales when they're finished fermenting, that I would have thought that the holes, just putting a couple of little holes in each bale with these prongs, wouldn't actually stop them from fermenting. One, because the different layers of plastic would actually move slightly. Oops, with the other side here. Would actually move slightly, so the hole in the outer layer of plastic would no longer be lined up perfectly to the hole in the inner layer of plastic after you've let the put the bales down again. And secondly, because I wouldn't have thought, even if they did stay lined up, the holes, I wouldn't have thought that two small holes like that would be enough to actually stop a bale from fermenting, because you punched two small holes in the plastic. So yes, because I find it so much easier to use bale prongs rather than the bale clamp type things that you're meant to use, I just use the prongs for all my bales, including the silage ones, even though I know technically that's wrong. But yeah, as I said, I suspect you probably can use it, and it doesn't really matter. You can see what I meant there about how I strap the bales on. So once I've got this first row on, I strap them before I start on the next row, and that way I can't bump those ones and knock them off the truck or anything. We'll just look though. Yes, this video has actually gone on a lot longer than I intended for it to, so we will quit in a second, but I do want to show you guys one other quick thing first. Let me just go to, sorry, this is how I get out of the game if I don't actually want to quit. I just want to show you something very quickly. For any of you that are on Steam, there's two games at the moment which I'm going to go into my wish list here. Won't matter if you guys see my wish list, won't matter at all. But on my wish list, this Super Woden Rally Edge, there was a playable demo out for that, which is free to download. Now, if this game seems very similar to me to that other rally one that I've played, the Art of Rally, with cartoony looks. So if you thought that Art of Rally looked quite good, you you can download Super Road and Rally Edge. There's a playable demo. The game itself hasn't been released yet. There's a playable demo of that one you can download for free. Then down here, Formula Legends. There's also a free playable demo you can download of that at the moment. So, and that's a Formula One game. Again, it's kind of like cartoony type, very arcade-like. It's not overly realistic. But you can race Formula One cars from all different eras. So if Formula Legends or Super Road and Rally Edge, if either of those games sound like maybe they're a bit of you, then I would really, really recommend that you go and download the playable demos that are available for those two games at the moment. And with that, I shall say goodbye to you all, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks. Bye.